Out of all the cheesecakes out there, the Basque cheesecake has to be my favorite. One of the things I like about it so much is that it doesn't have a crust, so that's one less step in the preparation. But another thing that makes it unique is that instead of being baked gently like most cheesecakes, it's baked at a very high temperature so that the outside burns, but the inside still stays very creamy. This unique texture combined with the caramelized flavors just make the cheesecake taste amazing. Today, I'll be showing you how I like to make my Basque cheesecakes after making dozens of them over the past few years, as well as a delicious blueberry sauce to go along with it.
The only thing we're going to need to prep for this crustless cheesecake is going to be the custard. So in a mixing bowl, add in room temperature cream cheese, and just like any cheesecake, you cannot use anything else other than Philadelphia cream cheese. After the cream cheese, add in white granulated sugar, salt, and a little bit of all-purpose flour. Then using a silicone spatula, cream the ingredients together until everything is mixed evenly and silky smooth. Scrape the cream cheese from the spatula using a whisk, then add in room temperature eggs, whisking them in one at a time. It may be hard to whisk in at first, but the mixture will loosen with each egg. A cool trick for warming up cold eggs is to place them in a pot of water on the stove and set the burner to its lowest setting. Within a few minutes, the eggs will warm up to room temperature. After adding in all of the eggs, the custard should have a consistency similar to this. Next, we have to add in our last two ingredients, which is heavy cream and some real vanilla extract. Whisk in the heavy cream and vanilla, being careful not to splash it out of the bowl. And don't forget to scrape down the sides of the bowl as well when whisking. The final mixture will be very thin, especially if you compare it to the custard for my New York cheesecake. But don't worry, the final texture of the cheesecake will not be loose if you don't want it to be. More on that later. With all the ingredients combined, and since we don't need to make a crust, all we need to do next is to pour the custard into its baking pan. For this recipe, you can of course use a standard springform pan, but you can also bake it in a 3-inch tall cake pan. To line the pan, just take a large square sheet of parchment paper and press it into the pan. Keep one hand in the center as you fold the parchment over the sides. And as you can see with a 9-inch pan, there's just enough parchment in some areas to barely cover the pan. Once the pan is lined with parchment, place it on a baking sheet and add in the custard. The final thing we'll need to do before baking is to trim off any excess parchment because it will just end up burning in the oven. A cool thing about Basque cheesecake is that you can control its texture by adjusting the baking temperature. If you want your cheesecake to be firmer and have a more traditional cheesecake texture, then bake it at 425 for around 55 minutes for a 9-inch cheesecake. But if you want your cheesecake to have a creamier and smoother texture, which is how I like to make this style of cheesecake, then bake it at 450 for about 40 to 45 minutes. Rather than rely on a timer, I like to judge my cheesecake's doneness by the browning on the top. When the cheesecake is finished baking, it should be deep brown all over and will have started to rise out of the pan. If you're still unsure of your cheesecake's doneness, you can give it the jiggle test. When it is finished baking, there should be a moderate amount of wobble in the center of the cheesecake. When the cheesecake is finished baking, remove it from the oven and let it cool until it reaches room temperature. The cheesecake will quickly start to deflate and fit back inside the pan. Here I have a side-by-side comparison of the two temperatures. The one baked at 450 is on the left, and the one baked at 425 is on the right. The color is similar between the two, but the one baked at 425 has more even browning, which is consistent with what I would expect. But regardless of baking temperature, this cheesecake is best served cold, so once it has come to room temperature, cover the pan with foil and let it chill in the fridge overnight. This cheesecake is already amazing by itself, but if you really want to take things to the next level, then a blueberry sauce is how you do it. To make the blueberry sauce, in a small sauce pot, add in fresh or frozen blueberries, sugar, and water. Turn the heat on to medium, and as soon as it starts to simmer, give the pot a stir. When the blueberries reach a boil, reduce the heat to medium-low, just enough to maintain a boil. Continue boiling the blueberries for about 10 minutes, stirring occasionally, or until some of them have started to break down. When you reach this point, add in a cornstarch slurry, which is 2 teaspoons of cornstarch mixed with 2 tablespoons of water. Allow the sauce to return to a boil, and once it's at a boil, the starches will gelatinize and thicken the sauce. After about 30 seconds of boiling, turn off the heat. This last ingredient will enhance the blueberry flavor and brighten the sauce. Add into 80 to 100% of the zest from a small lemon and half of its juice. With the heat still off, mix in the lemon. Cooking the lemon can change its flavor, which is why we add it in at the end. With that said, the lemon is still being cooked a little bit since the sauce is still hot. After mixing the sauce, give it a taste. If it's too sour, you can add an additional 1 to 3 teaspoons of sugar until the sweetness is to your liking. This is also a good opportunity to check the consistency of the sauce. There should still be a good amount of whole blueberries, and it should be thick enough that it coats the back of a spoon. Keep in mind that the sauce will continue to thicken as it cools. Transfer the finished sauce into a container and chill it in the fridge so it can be served cold. Now that the cheesecake is well chilled, we can remove it from the pan. If you're going to bake your cheesecake in a cake pan, I would recommend making it no larger than 8 inches and baking it at the lower temperature of 425 Fahrenheit. This will help prevent any accidents when lifting the cheesecake out of the cake pan. To slice the cheesecake, you'll need a chef's knife and a tall heat-safe container filled with boiling hot water. A cocktail shaker works quite well for this, but just be careful not to touch it barehanded after adding the hot water. Submerge the knife for a couple seconds in the hot water, dry it with a towel keeping the blade facing away from you, and then cut the cheesecake. The hot knife makes the cuts effortless and leaves you with very clean slices. Between each slice, you'll need to reheat and dry the knife. One of the best things about Basque cheesecake is that you can easily customize its texture to suit your taste. The first time I baked a Basque cheesecake at 450, I thought it was so good that I couldn't believe it was made from the same recipe. I thought maybe the cream cheese was higher quality somehow, but the results were repeatable. I knew that the higher temperature would make the cheesecake creamier, but it did change the taste as well. The cheesecake baked at 450 reminds me a lot of flan in both taste and texture. However, one downside is that the cheesecakes baked at 450 cannot be left at room temperature for too long because it will end up getting too soft. So if you know something will prevent you from eating the cheesecake soon after it's taken out of the fridge, I'd recommend baking it at 425 since the firmer texture will hold up better as the cheesecake warms up. So there you have it, one of the greatest cheesecakes, and it requires the least amount of effort. For some reason, I don't really see this style of cheesecake at restaurants too often, but I think that will make this even more special for the friends and family you decide to share it with. If you're looking for more desserts, here are 2 more from my channel that I think you will like.